and welcome back to my channel. It's Lizbeth, Persistence You with Lizbeth podcast, and this week we had Rachel Bruno on the podcast. Rachel shared her horror story of being involved with the child protective system and being accused of causing a brain injury on her infant, which then culminated in both of her children temporarily being out of her care. There was a very real chance that Rachel in this process could have faced legal charges through the criminal justice system. But at the very least, she already did face having her tiny children removed from her custody and care. If you want to hear more about Rachel's story and how she held the system accountable in California, the Child Protective Services there, by all means, listen to the podcast. She does a great job of sharing it. Rachel Bruno also wrote a book on her experience and she's an activist helping other parents who are caught up in the child protective system. One of the things that I wanted to discuss is that as a former social worker myself, I used to be that person that went and investigated child abuse. The child abuse system, child protective system is very different than the criminal justice system in America. You know how in theory in America, you are innocent until proven guilty. Often an attorney is going to be provided for you if you're facing legal charges and are incarcerated. Typically, you'd have to be incarcerated and show cause and need before you get one. But you have the right to have an attorney with you, and your rights are, in theory, you get your Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can or will be used against you. You know all that stuff. Child protective system is very, very different. And Rachel learned the hard way that the last thing she should have done was get real comfortable when a police officer who was working with social workers said, "Hey, can you help us? We want to help you discover who it was that injured your baby." She went on and talked and said the things that she knew without the benefit of having an attorney, because she truly believed that officer and the social worker were there to help solve the crime. And in fact, they had their minds made up from the beginning. I say this, I would take anyone's word with a grain of salt who just told me this story, but Rachel held the system to account and sued successfully and won more than $1 million settlement. I mean, it was a very brutal case that she was involved in. But what I want for you to understand is that the child protective services are so very different than the criminal justice system. And we as social workers relied very heavily on people just having informal conversations with us. More often than not, social workers are trying to do a job that is nearly impossible to do, but they're there to actually work with families and not go to court. But when the stakes are so high that there is an injury to a child's head, an infant's head, or a child is alleged to have been terribly abused or sexually abused, the stakes change pretty quickly. And so it was one thing for me as a social worker to go visit a home where kids were alleged not to have gone to school for a while. Then I really was having informal conversations where I tried to help, and social workers do this all the time, where we try to keep families together and get the services that they need to bridge any gaps that may be there so that kids are maintained safely in their home. That's the goal, typically, is that the kid be maintained in the home with services to help them grow and be protected and be the parents to have what they need to do well and flourish as a family. If, however, those stakes, like we talked about, are super high, like Rachel ran into, having an attorney she will discuss in the interview would have been such a great idea. I'm going to discontinue this interview and I will come back. Definitely I want to cooperate with you, but I will come back when I have legal counsel. That would have meant the world to her. She says later, it would have made the world of difference in her case and the outcome. So just keeping in mind that there is a time when social workers are able to very casually go in and try to find out what's going on. They want to get into the investigation quickly, get out, back out of people's lives, make sure in a perfect world that everyone has what they need so that children are safely maintained in the home. But when the stakes are high, by all means, it's a great idea for people to have a legal counsel before they cooperate in the investigation. And often a social worker, if they're working with police or the police officer, they're not going to say this is an investigation and you are a suspect. They will say, can you help us solve this crime? Or can you help us solve this problem? Can you help us help you? And it sounds so innocent, but a person would really need to be wary of what they're hearing and really think twice before going by themselves and saying whatever. It is not a sign of guilt to be smart enough to want to have a lawyer with you. So anyway, I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk a little bit more about Rachel's amazing interview. You'll have in show notes where to find the podcast and some other goodies.